Now it's time to talk about future trends in science communication, and I am happy to welcome Brian Trench, first of all, who is the president of the Pcst network. Could you please explain what the Pcst network is?
Thanks, Anders. The Pcst network is a network and about public communication of science and technology. The name reflects its origins in the 1980s. Probably today we would just simply call it science communication. And we bring together practitioners, policymakers, managers, program managers, researchers, educators, teachers, trainers, etc. All categories of people working in and about science communication for a biennial conference and also for more informal meetings, now webinars, obviously that's what we're all doing. And we try to develop and support the community of science communication.
So it's a global network, but where are you connecting from today?
Well, today in this room, I am in the southeast of Ireland, rural part of Ireland called County Wexford. And indeed, the network is thoroughly globalized at this stage. It started with a meeting in France, then a meeting in Spain, and then went on to meet in Canada and Australia and Korea and India. And the meeting that we should have had in 2020 would have been in Scotland, the first time in the United Kingdom. And in fact, that meeting has been, or that conference has been postponed till May of this year as a virtual and global conference.
Thanks, Brian. And let's continue with Annette. Hi, Annette.
Hi, nice to meet you. Hi.
Annette Klinkert, you are the Director of EUSEA. And where are you connecting from today?
Well, I am now based in Germany, where my office is, but EUSEA is formerly based in Austria, where it was founded 20 years ago.
And could you tell us a bit about what EUSEA is, the organization?
Yes, sure. EUSEA is the European Science Engagement Association, and we are a network of professionals working in the fields of public engagement and science communication. Our members are based in around 30 countries across Europe and beyond. And similar to PCST, we call ourselves a network, a family even of practitioners. And what we try to do is to qualify our members via conferences, workshops. We have formats such as hot pots and bistros where we get together regularly. We do have a science engagement platform for others to look at formats. And so we are just this international platform for people working in the field.
Thank you. And we also say welcome to James Pament. Hi, James. Whoa, can we hear you? Are you unmuted?
I always do that. Someone has to do it, right? Otherwise it isn't a proper online meeting.
It's the reality we've all lived through this past year. So, James, you are a researcher at Lund University. Could you tell us a bit more about your background?
Yeah, so I'm an associate professor at Lund University. I work with strategic communication. For the last few years, I've been providing a lot of support to governments on countering disinformation. For example, I helped write the Swedish guidance for MSB. I wrote the UK's guidance, and I've been working on EU disinformation policy for the last year and a half or so. And as part of that, I've been very closely tracking coronavirus disinformation.
Thank you. And you are in Lund right now, or?
I'm in my bedroom in Lund, yes.
Right.
Welcome.
So, and I would also say that originally we also had Catherine French from Excite to be with us in the panel, but unfortunately she has been struck with a virus that has been sort of central of the last year, but she's doing fairly well, but we hope to meet her in another context soon. So I would like you to reflect on the question, well, given your experiences during the last year's pandemic, and what did you learn, and what do you see as the major trends in science communication going forward? So I would like to invite Brian first to reflect on this question.
Well, in the first part, I'll not particularly refer to lessons learned, but perhaps more just observations that I've made that may have implications for science communication. The first one is that there has been a public exposure on a massive scale to science in the making. That's a phrase that's often used to make the distinction between finished science, results, findings, theories, and the processes of science. And science in the making has been on public view in a way that I've never experienced, and I don't think any of us in our lifetimes have experienced, which means that the public has been exposed to the uncertainties and the unknowns in the practice of science, and has been able at some level to listen into, or maybe at best join in, the conversations of experts around the unknowns and the uncertain things. That seems to me one major observation that may have implications then for the new normal in the future. Science communication in the past year has been fully COVIDized. It's very hard to find significant amount of science communication around anything else. There's been a bit of astronomy and space science in recent days, but you know, a lot of it has been COVIDized, and I wonder again, what will that look like when the pandemic, as it will eventually do, recedes? I've done a lot of work over the years on models of science communication, and I'm struck by the coexistence in almost equal measure of a science communication that is highly prescriptive, even dogmatic, and a science communication that's that's much more caring and sensitive to the burdens of the population and reassuring. And that's, again, I think, an interesting observation that may have implications for the future. So we see science communication as much less about discovery and breakthrough, and much more about, as I said earlier, processes of science and warnings about the impacts of the virus, and reassurance about the possibilities of combating and defeating the virus. Further observation would be that public trust and confidence in science has remained stable, if not actually gone up, across diverse cultural contexts, and indeed across diverse policy contexts. And that's perhaps not surprising to those of us who've been watching these trends over many years, but still, and it has maybe something to do with what James will talk about in a moment, but it's still perhaps somewhat notable, if not surprising, that even now, with the disagreements, the open expression of disagreements about the shape and form policy should take, that public trust and confidence remains in science and in medicine remains at high levels. Maybe that's enough just for the moment about what's been going on over the last year. A couple of other observations that I might make, but let me try and extrapolate from that for the future. I think we now see much more clearly than we ever saw before that science is not a single thing. It's not a single set of answers to a single set of problems. It's much more complicated, complex, interdisciplinary, wicked than that, and there are no single correct answers, no magic bullets. That has implications for the way in which science communication works, and should have and will have a future in the future. Scientists have been moving more and more across the borders from expounding science and explaining science to intervening in policy. And those boundaries are very blurred. And that creates a need for science communication to provide more interpretation, curation, and analysis of what's being produced by the scientific communities, and not just acting as transmitters or indeed promoters. Science communication is everywhere. It was already the case, but it's now visibly and tangibly the case. There are conversations about science going on in all sorts of places. And this ties in with a conception that I've been developing with my colleague Masmiana Buki about thinking of science communication as the social conversation around science. And the implications for professionals and practitioners in the field is that they should think of themselves as facilitators of conversation, joining a pre-existing conversation rather than being the sole origin or sources of a conversation. I've been looking at trends over many years in science communication, and in the 2000s we were looking at engagement and dialogue as a trend, professionalization. In the 2010s, internationalization and diversification of formats and platforms. In the 2020s, I think we'll be looking at further diversification in the direction of art science as a form of science communication, more visibly and more immediately available than before. But also, I think we'll be looking at a trend of mainstreaming, where science enters the everyday in a way that hasn't been observed before, and, as I say, enters the conversation that people are having in bars and pubs and cafes and so on when they're having their fika. That'll do for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I was asked, there was a sound problem in the beginning, so could you just do the very, very short version of what the Pcst network is?
The network is an international network of science communication practitioners, educators, researchers, professionals of various kinds, and volunteers working in science communication. And it organizes a conference every 2 years, which attracts people from 50, 60 countries. And it aims to support and develop and reinforce the communities of science communication around the globe.
Thank you, Brian. So let's continue with Annette. If you answer the same questions, what are your reflections?
Well, yeah, let me start by saying that the pandemic for the public engagement community was certainly one of the most devastating experiences that we had, because it challenged all the activities that had been planned and needed now to be cancelled. It challenged the way we designed festivals, the way we shaped engagement concepts with different stakeholders. And the first reaction of the community was, let's move everything digital. So digitalization was seen as the solution to the dilemma we all faced. And then after a couple of weeks, we all realized, okay, let's take this time to reflect what we are doing, to reflect the approaches that we have been following for more than 10 years, some of us, and to take this as a big opportunity to define a new role for science communication and public engagement within Europe and even beyond. So what we say now is that times have never been so challenging and at the same time so exciting for science communication, because, as Brian said, suddenly the full spot of the public is on the role of science communication. And this is also true for the realm of academia. And to explain the learnings that we see and the changes that I would claim in science communication, I would like to start with a quote from the European Commission. In the Rome Declaration on Responsible Research and Innovation, they said that excellence, scientific excellence today is about more than groundbreaking discoveries, but it should include openness, responsibility, and the co-production of knowledge. And what we see in our community is that we can help science and the academic community to develop this renewed understanding of scientific excellence by helping them to meet these new standards. We can support them to conduct a research which is indeed more open, more responsible, and co-creative. In order to do that, we definitely need to move away from the mere dissemination approach, telling others about the research results that have been developed, towards a research that is in alignment with the values, the need, and the challenges of society. So if we want to move away from the dissemination approach, there's another approach we need to move away from in our community, and that is the mere focus on promoting STEM only as the epitome of research. because as many of us see today, this promotion of STEM subjects only and the promotion of a fascination for the STEM field can be a barrier to inclusive innovation, which is needed today. So the pandemic has shown to all of us that a global challenge has more than a technological dimension. It has a social dimension, economic dimensions, psychological components, and the future of science communication and engagement will definitely need to embrace and involve more disciplines coming from science, but also from the humanities, from the arts, from psychology, philosophy, history, in order to help us to understand the complexity and the urgency of the challenges that lie ahead of us. So we need to be self-critical. We also need to focus on the complexities of the research process, not simplifying it when presenting it to others, but helping to show that the complexity is what makes academic research rich and what is actually the very fascination of science in connection to different stakeholders. So in practice, this means that we need to help researchers to connect to different stakeholders. So not just to the society, whatever this society may be, to be very much more specific about the audiences we want to involve and work with. And to help them to find links to experts inside and outside of academia who they can shape their research with in a more collaborative way. We live in a time of rapid transformation. This is true for all aspects of life and definitely true for our community, which means that we need to be self-critical in the tools we apply, in the methodologies we use, and qualifying ourselves as a community will be just as important as training researchers in their abilities to communicate. Now, in this new approach, what I would see as a big opportunity that we could take up in public engagement is the role of our direct urban environments. And that links to what Paul has said in the previous session, that an alignment with our local urban and regional context will allow us to have living labs around us in which we can experiment, co-create, and include engagement with stakeholders, not just within the field of citizens, there can be experts as well, but definitely also in the fields of urban planning, in the fields of people working with retirement people, working in diverse neighborhoods. So these actual environments of academic institutions should be more playgrounds for the way we work together, and we should form partnerships with the academic community to really see us as partners in reshaping academic excellence for the 21st century. So there's no longer a field of science communication and a field of science, but these two worlds should merge more so that scientists can benefit from our qualifications and we can get more serious in our community in what we do in helping to address the challenges that lie ahead of us. What we need for this also is to show that science, as has been mentioned earlier, is not the only carrier of truth, and it's not a preacher of knowledge showing people that we have the evidence and now you act accordingly, but science is an element of an innovation ecosystem. In order to see yourself as an element of an ecosystem, you need to be modest, you need to learn to listen, to reflect, and to facilitate dialogues. And this is the role that science communication can support and can help scientists to learn and to carry out these new roles in a new world where science is more closely related to society. So these are the learnings I would like to share, but I'm happy to answer the questions too.
Thank you very much, Annette. And let's go to James.
Thank you. The thing I would probably pick out as the most important trend is what I would call communicating uncertainty. I think Brian very eloquently called it communicating science in the making. But the science in the making appears to the public as uncertainty and risk. And when you're trying to communicate risk and uncertainty, I think we see over the last year that everybody has struggled with that, from the way the EU handled Italy at the beginning, to the way countries have explained their measures, their lockdowns, to the rollout of vaccines, we're really struggling to get across that sense of a scientific understanding of uncertainty and the risk that what we believe to be the best fit, if you like, the most science in process, explaining that and getting that across has been a massive challenge, particularly as the people who are consumers of this kind of information, some of them are locked in these hyper partisan debates on social media, which is where I spend a lot of my time trying to learn about how people are kind of consuming this science. And you see people in these hyper partisan debates, there's an argumentative tone, often quite aggressive, often involving trolling, sometimes even feeding into harassment off of the platforms that turns into real world harassment. And there's very rarely any interesting consensus or mutual understanding. Actually, it's people who are full-time Twitterers, tweeps, whatever you want to call them. They sit on social media all day. Their status is derived from their level of engagement and their commitment to being Twitterers rather than their expertise. And there are accounts that are pumping out 100, anything up to 250 tweets a day, every day, full time, 7 days a week. And it's a flood of half-digested nonsense. They grab at any evidence that pops into their feed, trying to score points against their adversaries. And they can be wrong all the time. Whatever it is that comes into their feed, they repeat it. It's right or wrong. It's quite random. And they can do that. But if you're a respectable institution or representing an organization, if you say the wrong thing once, it lives forever and you'll never get past that claim. So even if you're a full-time communicator trying to compete with these hyper-partisan debaters, you just can't win. There is really nothing you can do. The kind of arguments they're using are also extremely difficult to work with. A lot of social proof. My cousin's best friend's sister's friend took the AstraZeneca vaccine and their arm fell off. Therefore, and you can't really, it's really difficult to argue against that with facts. Of course, you can try, but then they'll use straw man arguments. They'll claim that people are saying things that they just aren't saying. They'll use what aboutism. So what about this? What about that? They'll say there's no evidence, even though there's lots of evidence. They'll switch between a conversation with you to kind of grandstanding. And representative of this organization claims this when you were just having a direct conversation with them. They'll switch to ad hominem and try to discredit the organization or the person. And they will often, because the ends are so much more important than the means, truth doesn't matter. Because if something ends up being false, well, it doesn't matter because it's just an example of the kind of things that you do anyway. So even, picking out the facts doesn't change anything. So like a combination of these rhetorical tactics from people who just flood social media posts all day, every day, it's very hard to counteract that. It's pretty much undefeatable. One of the other really interesting things is these partnerships of convenience in their need for tweets and retweets and reinforcements and positive comments. They'll interact with networks through keywords without necessarily understanding what those networks actually do and what they believe. So, for example, one network I've been looking at was critical of public service and the way public service has reported on coronavirus. And so they started using these keywords that brought them a lot of likes, basically referring to public service as state media. Obviously, the difference is that state media isn't editorially independent. State media is led by the government. So they started using this term, and it drew in these other networks of people who are interested in defunding public service, but have absolutely the opposite goals when it comes to how coronavirus is being handled. And it doesn't seem to matter. They just enjoy the intention, even if it goes against their core objectives. So the hyperpartisan debate is a real problem. It's something that exists in this uncertainty, in this science in the making, as Brian called it. These gaps, these risks, these things that we're trying to communicate and reassure the public with, and it creates substantial problems, I would say, for the future of science communication. A few options for where we might go with this. One option is to give up on hyperpartisan audiences altogether. Just focus your energy on people who are ready to listen, and as much energy as you can spare on what we might call the thoughtful undecided, the people who are persuadable. I think we need to start to accept that science communication isn't just about facts and messages, it's also about situational awareness, threat intelligence, and risk assessments. We need to start rethinking about how we do communications and the kind of tools that we're drawing on.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you. And thank you to Brian and Annette. Unfortunately, we are running a bit short of time, but thank you for your very interesting and highly valuable contributions. We'll continue the discussion in Eftersnack after the conference. So please continue there. Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, James. And we are going to add some more perspectives to the discussion with inputs from our colleagues around the world, as you saw in the beginning of the day in this short film segment. So we will get perspectives from Germany, South Africa, Australia, and Brazil as well.
I have long thought that we always present science as being absolute when it never is. And we need to present and make people, but help them understand better that science is about disagreements and that it's fine for scientists to disagree. But within the context of a pandemic, we need to be able to explain to them what the extent that our knowledge is. I mean, how sure are we of the knowledge that we're presenting, and what are our uncertainties? And we need to let people know that it's fine to be uncertain, but that we're giving the best available science in our communication. The best way to create change is through participation, where science is one of the actors in that participation, not the driver necessarily, and certainly not the main actor that's happening in solving that problem. So science becomes one of the actors in participatory science communication that looks to solve some of these big problems that we face.
But I think as far as the public is concerned, a trend that has happened and that I hope will continue and that we can build on, one positive thing that has come out of this pandemic is that we really see why and how we need specialist science journalists. And we all know that the media around the world is in crisis and that science journalism and science journalists specifically have been hit hard. And therefore, I hope that if the current business models of journalism does not allow for us to sustain these specialist health journalists, that we will see more of what is called here, and I'm sure there are models around the world, donor-funded science journalism.
Even before the pandemics, I think that at least in terms of discourse, there was a very important trend of trying to not use only the deficit model and trying to engage more science and society. The whole discussion that we see in Europe, it was already very strong in Brazil and in Latin America in general. Sometimes more in terms of discourse than in practical terms. For example, sometimes people, but it's not a problem only in Brazil. I think that this is an issue in the whole world, that we talk a lot about how we could do science communication, but in practical terms, sometimes we are delivering a lot of scientific content.
Since we're all aware that communication increasingly takes place in digitized environments with these filter bubbles and echo chambers, we need to look more deeply into what we call motivated reasoning in psychology, people's demand to be deceived, basically to look for information that confirms their existing beliefs. There are answers in social research, for example, inoculation theory, which is trying to pre-bunk the information instead of debunking myths and disinformation. So you try to prepare people to sift through that, to that pile of knowledge there. I think there are approaches in psychology and in social research at large which have already been and will increasingly be applied in practice. And the second major trend in general would probably be that more social research is being and will be applied in science communication practice, and vice versa. Researchers, scholars in our field learn to listen better to the research needs expressed in practice, what we have called science communication praxis in our pre-conference workshop here to the Science Communication Forum.